Well, hey, Phil, it's such an honor to be able to interview you. I was just mentioning to you before we hit record that I've been following your work for well over a decade when I used to be on staff at a church and have continued to follow now that I'm on staff at a rescue mission. And you have quite a resume. You've been a producer that's worked with Disney, Dreamworks, Joel Osteen, Joyce Meyer, the Museum of the Bible, the YouVersion Bible app. You have your fingerprints on a lot of big things. Give us a little background on the story of that. What's your background on how you got into producing and how you got to be a part of so many cool things?
Well, I started in high school, actually. I used to make movies with my dad's Super 8 movie camera.
Hmm.
I didn't know what I was doing, but I had a group of friends in high school that loved to make army movies, mafia movies, space movies, whatever. We little 3-minute reels on my dad's Super 8 camera. That's how old I am. And never thought about doing it for a living. But I went to college and I thought, well, maybe find some buddies in college that'll want to make these little movies. So I took my camera, took my reels with me, and literally the first day I was unpacking my suitcase, a bunch of the film reels fell out of my suitcase. And a guy across the hall, I'll never forget, said, "Hey, I can show you how to edit those. I'm taking a film class." So
Hmm.
that night, we literally went down to the
Wow.
film department, stayed up late, cutting my film, working on it. And the professor happened to be there. And as he was leaving about midnight, he was leaving and stopped by and introduced himself and said, I've been watching your little film out of the corner of my eye. And he said, "It's better than most of what my students are doing." He
Hmm.
said, "Would you mind if I showed it in my class tomorrow?" So I said, "Yeah." And if I could sit on the back row. So the next day, literally as a freshman, I came in, sat on the back row. He showed my movie to the class. And it was nothing great. Trust me, it was nothing to scream about. But when it was over, they talked about it. They discussed it. And
Hmm.
I had this crystal clear moment of revelation. I mean, this thing hit me like a ton of bricks that if I could do something with a camera that makes people talk like this, that's what I'm supposed to do with my life. And
Wow.
so, literally,
And
that
how old
day,
were you?
I changed my major. Do what?
How old were you?
Oh, I was a freshman in college.
Wow.
Freshman in
Okay.
college, and
Yeah.
literally changed my major that day. I was a preacher's kid, so I'd signed up to be a music major because that was the job description at the time. And I changed my major to film and television, and I've literally never looked back.
Wow. Um, it's curious with that. You have a book called, I think it's called One Thing, and it's all about finding your calling. You found it very, very
Yeah.
early. I am curious, what would your advice be to people to finding what they're called to do for the rest of their life? I think a lot of people would love to have that experience where it's like, hey, I never have to look back. I never have to wonder what I'm called to do. I just get to do what I love every day. Any advice there?
Yeah, I meet people in their 70s that tell me, "Phil, I've been successful. I've worked all my life, but I've never really felt like I was doing what I was really born to do." And when I wrote the book One Big Thing, I saw so many people that struggle, and I realized from my work with nonprofit organizations, churches, ministry outreaches, that the ones that get noticed aren't the ones that are pretty good at a lot of things. They're the ones who are extraordinary at one
Hmm.
big thing. And I realized that translated to people's careers. Most of the people I meet would tell me, "Phil, I'm pretty good at a lot of stuff, but very few I meet are really extraordinary at one thing." And one of the things I always recommend to people: start with what you were good at. I'm not a believer in passion. So
Hmm.
many people come to me and say, "Phil, I'm passionate about this or I'm passionate about that." But the truth is, they're just not very good at it. I get screenplays sent to me all the time by writers who say, "Phil, I'm so passionate about writing." But it doesn't take many pages in before I realize, yeah, but they're really a terrible writer.
Hmm.
My advice is figure out what you were wired to do. What were you extraordinary at? What did people know throughout your life? Remember in the high school homecoming committee. I sat on the homecoming committee, and you sit around and people say, "Well, Bob, you're good with numbers. Why don't you do the budget? Susan, you're good in front of people. Why don't you be the host? Jack, you're really creative. Why don't you come up with a theme?" It's funny that other people notice what we're kind of wired to do even before we do. So look back over your life. I directed some programs for ESPN years ago, and I would have athletes tell me, I was always the guy that could catch the ball in my neighborhood when nobody else could, or I was the fastest guy, or I was just really big. So find the things you were wired to do. What are you naturally really good at? That's usually the first step in deciding and discovering what you were really born to do.
Yeah, and talk to the person. You talked about how everyone says I'm a good writer, then they give you the manuscript and 3 pages in you're done.
Yeah.
Talk to that person because I think there's a lot of people in that category that want to do something. How do you know if you truly are meant to do something? Obviously you have to get good at something. What would be your advice for that person who maybe they don't have it yet, but if they kept going and didn't quit, maybe they would get there? Or what are your thoughts on that process?
Very often, it's something that we have to like for in my career, I wanted to be a director so bad I couldn't stand it. I studied directing. I filmed in about 70 countries around the world over the years. Um, I've got books on directing and the lives of great directors. But I was doing a massive project in Vancouver one time, a short film for the largest advertising agency in the world, dramatic thing. It was a huge, complex, big budget project. And about halfway through, I realized I'm just not getting what I want out of the actors. And I'd hit a wall in some way. And it really shocked me because I was pretty good at directing. I've got a bunch of awards for it. But once I really thought about it and really spent some time thinking about it, I realized I'd kind of hit my wall, hit my ceiling, if you will, as a director. And
Hmm.
when I thought about it more, I realized, but most of the projects I've done, I've written because I couldn't afford a writer, and most of them I've produced because I couldn't afford a producer. And I started thinking more that, wait a second, writing and producing is really what I'm great at. I'm great at finding the project, together the team, kind of supervising the whole thing, writing the project. And like you say, it's writing is something that I still struggle with. I work hard at every day, but I love it. I feel great doing it. It's something that I can't do it enough. I would do it for free. There's no question about that. I love it so much. So very often it's not the thing that you're most excited about early on, but it's the thing you just feel really great about doing. It's the thing. I remember I was working on a project in Italy late at night. It's like at 3 in the morning, pouring down rain, driving rainstorm, freezing cold, standing on this hillside. We're filming a scene. And I realized at that moment I was absolutely miserable, but I was having the time of my life. And
Hmm.
the thought occurred to me, this is what I was really born to do. I love being here at this moment. So finding that thing where you really feel like you're contributing, you're making a difference, and yet you feel confident in your ability to do it is really key. Even though you need to continue learning and growing for the rest of your life, I think it's important to know that you feel confident enough that this may be the thing you were called and born to do.
Hmm. That's so good. You talked about your passion for writing. You have a book coming out in May called "Ideas on a Deadline,"
Yeah.
and talking to creatives. I want you to talk about the book, but I've been following you for 13, 14 years. You have a blog. You blog consistently. You have a podcast. You are a content machine, which is one of my goals this year is to become a content machine. How do you produce so much content, and what advice would you have for those who in the world we live in have to or need to produce a lot of content to build their platform?
Well, I'm a ferocious reader. I'm constantly reading. If you saw my office, I have a huge library, really huge library. My dad was a pastor. He had two PhDs. He had a huge library himself, and I really grew up in that library. I grew up surrounded by books, and it really gave me a hunger for reading. And I think the thing I recommend the most is, I talked to Jim Kruger the other day on my podcast, who's a comic writer. He writes for Marvel Comics, he writes for DC, and he said, read something every day, watch something every day, and write something every day or
Hmm.
create something every day if you're a filmmaker or a musician or an artist or whatever you do. And I think that's a really great rule. Read something every day, write something every day, do something every day, whatever it is that you're good at doing. I think that's really important. And watch something every day. So I try, I've got my Netflix cranking, my Amazon cranking. I like to watch current things that are going on, but I'm also a really voracious reader. And I think as creative people, we need to be up on what people are doing. We need to see what's happening in the world because if we want to speak the language of the culture, we need to be up to date and know what language people are speaking these days. And I think that's really, really critical.
And so the whole concept of ideas on a deadline. Why did you write this book, and what do you want leaders to get out of it and creatives?
Well, two things. I discovered number one that most people, there's a huge number of people out there that just think they weren't born creative. Let me just say, encourage anybody watching or listening right now that there is not a shred of evidence that says some of us were born creative and some of us weren't. The
Hmm.
truth is, we are all born wildly creative. Put a bunch of toddlers in a room. You're never going to look at that one of those guys and say, hey, he's going to be an accountant. He's not creative at all. Little kids are all wildly creative, yet we grow up and we start losing that muscle. We stop using it. We stop being creative. It's a choice we make, not something we're born into. So number one, I wrote the book because I want everyone to know, whether you're a creative person or whether you're a real estate agent or a coach or a teacher, everybody can be more creative in their life. And the second reason is most people think creative ideas just come to us at random. If I
Hmm.
sit on the back porch, the creative fire will fall from heaven or the muse will hit. But the truth is, I've lived my whole life under deadlines. I'm a television producer. So every week I've got to hit a target. I've got to hit a deadline. I've produced Super Bowl commercials, I learned pretty quickly that the Super Bowl is not going to delay their date because I can't come up with a good idea for my commercial. So over the years, I've learned techniques and I've studied research that really opens us up to being able to produce breakthrough ideas at the moment we need the most. And that's really why I wrote the book, because I want people to understand that you can come up with great ideas. You can come up with amazing thoughts and ideas and create creative stuff just on a deadline. When the pressure is on, when you have no way out, there's a way to do it. And I think that's the heart of the book. And that's, I think, so important for people that are creative. And it's important for people that really, in my mind, creativity is about solving problems. We all solve problems for a living.
Hmm.
So being able to do it under pressure, I think is really important.
Yeah, and along those lines, you had an interesting section in the book that I want to ask you about, and just ask you how you do this personally. But it's about saying no. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm an idea person. I think about our marketing and communication team at the mission. Anything, any new idea, bright and shiny, I'm like, let's do it, let's do it. And I never think about the capacity of the team, which I've learned to. I mean, I became self-aware, or they made me aware of that. But how do you learn what to say no to and what to say yes to when it comes to creative ideas?
It was funny. A network TV writer invited me over to his office one day here in Hollywood. I went to the studio, went to his office, and his frustration was he really struggles to get all his creative work done during the day. He said, Phil, I can't hit my deadlines with the scripts. I'm struggling. I just don't have enough hours in the day to do it. And I just need to know some answers. But as I sat with him, it was interesting that he kept the door open. And like 6 or 8 times in the hour I was with him, people would just pop in. Hey, how are you, man? What's going on? You want me to get some coffee? Things like that. The guy was interrupted like every 5 to 10 minutes simply because he kept his office door open. He always said yes to people. When people would look in and say, Bob, can you get that file for me? Or Sam, what was that? That article I needed from a couple weeks ago. He'd always volunteer to do it. And I learned he couldn't say no to anything. And so his day was literally filled up with stuff he was doing for other people. And I discovered early on that, for instance, with email, if you're constantly spending your day answering email, the chances are you're spending your day responding to other people's priorities. And I've learned that if you don't say no occasionally, then your yes means nothing. So the important thing to understand is if you've been called to do something significant, if you feel like your life matters and you're working on a big project, you have to say no to a lot of things that will free up that time that will allow you to do it. And the thing is, in my book, I listed a whole bunch of ways to say no. You don't have to be a jerk. You can be nice, you can be gracious. And I think it's important to realize that. And I give you some options in the book about how to do that. But until we learn to say no, most of us think we'll get shot if we say no. But the truth is, saying no is incredibly important. And unless we can do that, we're never going to open up our lives to have the amount of time we need to accomplish things that are really important to us.
You talked about not checking email. Do you have any systems or boundaries in your life on a weekly basis that enable you to be creative, like I only check email once a day, or hey, do you block out six
Yeah,
hours every morning to write? I'd just be curious how you live your life that way.
it's a struggle I will die with. I'll tell you that. I've tried every single program, concept, strategy, technique out there. And part of the problem is I'm in the service business. So, we're driven, we're client driven. Our team at Cooke Media Group is client driven. And while we do a lot of films and projects and I write books and things on our own, we're also client driven. And I want to be available to those clients. And that's the way a lot of people are. They may not have clients, but they've got a boss. And so it's not like I can just shut things down and say, I'm going to answer my email twice a day. That's just really impossible for me because I need to address issues as they come up. But I have learned that if we don't, I've turned off all my notifications. I don't get notified for anything. I just go in every once in a while, periodically during the day, and check things and see how they're doing. I think we just have to have a personal discipline. I think a big part of it is the big thing that's helped me is search has become so great with email these days. Whether you use Apple Mail or Outlook or other programs, search has become so fantastic that in the old days we'd have 60 or 70 folders, email folders, remember? And now I've
Yep.
cut those back to about 5. We just don't need to. I think it takes more time to use different folders to try to find that document we were looking for than it would be just to search for it. So I've learned some little techniques and secrets like that. But I think the important thing is be intentional. We really have to be intentional because I want to focus. Two things I would say really quickly that are important is number one, find the time of day you're most productive in. We all operate on circadian rhythm. We have cycles. Some of us are at our best in the morning, some in the afternoon, some late at night, and some keep rock star hours. Me, I'm best from 6 a.m. to noon. I can write like a madman. I can create ideas. I can come up with great stuff in the morning. But in the afternoon or evening, I'm pretty worthless. I can travel, I can do meetings and phone calls and things like that, even speak at conferences. But when it comes to coming up with creative stuff, I need to do it in the morning. So I block out as much of that time as possible because I think that's really increased my productivity. And some people have day jobs, they can't totally block out the time of day they're best at. But, in my case, I was working full time when I discovered this. And I just started coming in 2 hours early. I would come in at 6 in the morning before everybody came in at 8. And I wrote my first two books from 6 to 8 in the morning during those 2 hours because I was so much more productive. So figure that out and it'll be a big step for most people.
Yeah, I wanted to get this later, but since you mentioned it, you've written several books. What advice do you have for aspiring authors?
Right. I think the thing that I find with most writers is I'll ask them, what do you do? And well, I want to be a writer. Well, have you published anything? No. Have you written anything? Well, no, I'm waiting to meet an agent. I'm waiting to meet a publisher. I'm waiting to meet a producer. I'll tell you, you just have to be doing it. You have to be doing it. So my big advice for all writers is do it and do it every day. Come up with a system, come up with a place you work best, come up with a time of day you work best, get the tools around you, eliminate the distractions in your life, put the phone away and really focus. We're never going to write if we just want to be a writer. We have to actually sit down and do it. And very often I sit down and I don't have anything great to say. So I'll just write something trivial that just gets the pump going. And once that pump gets going, I delete that document and I started on my book or I started on that presentation or that script. That's what really I think it takes to really be a writer. Get out there and actually start writing.
Yeah, and then on the other end of writing, you publish a book, but now we live in a world where, there's millions and millions and millions of books. There's a lot of
Yeah.
focus on building platform and the need to have a platform. I remember talking to an agent, and he's like, "Hey, if you don't have an email list of 25,000 people, we're not interested in talking
Yeah.
to you." Um, what advice do you have for people and leaders when it comes to developing their platform in today's world? You wrote an excellent book that I want to dive into called "Maximize Your Influence," which I encourage all leaders
Yeah.
to get. But what advice? This is what you do. You help people get their message out there.
Yeah, I do. A big part of what we do is consult with the leaders to help them get their message out there, and very often books are a key to that. But platforms are really critical. I mean, we live in a world today. Social media has created a world where the largest industry on the planet is now the self promotion industry. I mean,
Hmm.
you've got 6-year old kids that are making 12, 13, $15 million a year on YouTube. We have adults making 30, $40 million a year. We have people with tens of millions of subscribers and followers. So the platform situation has changed everything out there. In fact, as you said, many publishers, traditional publishers, don't even want you to publish a book unless you have a huge following already. In fact, my daughter and son-in-law are both actors here in Hollywood, and she lost a commercial recently to an actress who I don't know if she was better than my daughter, but she had more social media followers. And that's a big thing
Wow.
because the company wants to promote their stuff on social media. So platforms have become critical. And my feeling is take it seriously. Some people use their social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, other things just for fun. And that's okay. But you can use your social media platforms to really tell the world who you are, what your expertise is, and why they need to pay attention and follow you. And I think that's a powerful tool. It's free, it doesn't cost anything. And building up your social media following can be such an important way to get books done, to be invited to speak at conferences, to be, sought out by clients and other people. It's just really, really important. And so it's not life and death. You don't have to if you just don't feel comfortable with it. But I do think we live in a world where getting your story out there via social media has become absolutely critical. And I would encourage people to take it to the next level. Get serious about it. Be intentional. I think that's so important.
Yeah, and you talk about this in the book, but I'm curious your advice. Should people may say, I don't know what to do. Would you encourage people to hire a brand manager or outsource their social media, or is that something they should do personally and learn how to do it?
We do that with a lot of clients. It's both ways. In my case, I enjoy doing it. I enjoy doing it. Now, if people, as a result of this podcasts decide to follow me, just understand Instagram is my playground. Disregard everything I say when it comes to my Instagram feed at Phil Cooke. I just have fun with it and I go kind of crazy with it. But the important thing to understand is if you enjoy doing it, great. If it's better to hire somebody, bring them on, particularly if you're a executive level, a pastor, a ministry leader, something, if you have a high level leadership role, I would encourage you to at least talk to a branding expert, talk to a social media person, get their insight on what you should do, because it really is important. It's funny that big companies, big organizations, nonprofits, even churches, they don't think twice about having an accountant on a retainer, monthly retainer, or an attorney on a monthly retainer, but they never think about having a communications professional on a monthly retainer. We live today in a world where the average person sees about 10,000 media messages every single day. I saw a statistic the other day that the average person touches their iPhone 250 times a day. So in that world, it becomes vitally important to be able to speak into that and speak that
Yeah.
language. So I would encourage leaders, get that kind of advice from people who are experts. We do it with clients, others do it with clients. And so it's just really important to get people's opinion about how you should be presenting yourself, what you should say. For instance, I'll give you a tip. I think one of the biggest reasons people follow you on social media is because they want to know what it's like to be you. If you're the president of an organization or a manager or a nonprofit leader of any kind, people love to know what that's like. Show them a glimpse of what your life is behind the scenes. People love that. So little tricks like that, little ideas can be really influential in helping you grow your social media following.
Yeah, you talked about organizations, and you talk about this in the book, and it's something I've been thinking about recently. I was about what positions organizations need to hire to grow their influence. And I was meeting with a leader recently, and he said, in the business world, they don't blink twice about having a research and development department, but that's almost unheard of in churches and nonprofits. And I'm just curious,
Yeah.
in your opinion, what positions do you consider vital for organizations to organize their and maximize their influence? Do they need a PR department? Do
Yeah,
they need research
absolutely.
and development? What do they need?
That's a great point. I always tell churches, ministries, nonprofit organizations, one of the first people you need to hire is a communications person, communications director. I find in many of the most effective churches in the country, the communications role, that communications director, is one of the closest people to the pastor or ministry or nonprofit leader, because they have to, a pastor will get up on Sunday and preach to a congregation, but that communications director job is to get it not only to the congregation, but way beyond the walls of that church. So media communications is a really important thing. And your point about research departments is really true. I also think you need to have a team. If you can possibly afford this, you need a team on in your organization that they do nothing but they're trying out new things. They're failing regularly. They're trying stuff that nobody's tried before. I want to see them pushing the envelope. It's really ingrained in our team here at Cooke Media Group, and we work with churches and nonprofits and ministry organizations that have that kind of little R&D team, and they're just trying, okay, what apps could be better for us? What should we be looking at? How do we get our message out in a bigger way? What are the ways that we could expand beyond the walls of this organization? That is important. So you need to have a team that has the permission to fail, has the permission to try new things. It's not a big budget thing. They're not, they don't have to be buying a lot of equipment and gear and things like that, but they need to be trying new apps, new platforms, experimenting to see what could work. I just don't think we do enough of that experimentation. We know in the corporate world that many of the biggest, most popular products were created in an R&D room. So why wouldn't that work in a Christian setting or in a church or synagogue or temple? There's just so many ways that if we could get that R&D thinking into our head, we could create new things that we've never dreamed before.
That's so good. And you talked about the leader being closest to the communications
Yeah.
director. And in the book, I love this. You had a list of 10 reasons you're not ready to lead creatives. And I would say that, I've seen the tension between, leaders of organizations trying to connect with creatives. What advice do you have leaders listening to this on? Okay, now you have creatives in leadership positions or on your team. How the heck do you lead these people and get along?
That's a great question. And the truth is, creative people are a little different from the accounting staff. They're a little different from, the manufacturing team. They're a little different from the guys in the loading dock. They just think differently, and that's what makes them special. So it's not like herding cats. It's like really hurting tigers, because the potential of a creative team is really amazing. A couple
Yeah.
of the things that I would suggest is create a stable situation for them. One thing I find is leaders very often will threaten their creative team with, hey, if this new logo design doesn't work, we're out of business. Or if this new presentation doesn't go over well, we're going to be in trouble. That does not create an environment for coming up with breakthrough ideas. You need to give them a certain amount of stability so they can be wildly creative and risky in their thinking. So don't ever threaten creative people that, look, everything rests on this new idea. That's just not an attitude you want them to have. It's not really important. Another thing I would say is, do give them deadlines. Dirty little secret I can tell you, I'll share from creative people, is we love deadlines. Honestly, I don't even start a project till I see the deadline approaching in the distance. I talked to a airline pilot recently, and he said, I'll tell you, there's something about seeing the end of the runway approaching when I'm taking off that gets my blood really pumping. And I'm the same way with deadlines. I think that deadlines are important because they do give you a map. We know I have to have that idea by then. I can start planning my research. I can just start planning my writing schedule, my work schedule around that. So don't be afraid to give creative people deadlines, because they actually really thrive on those. And I think it's important. Another thing I'd suggest is give them a little flexibility. I've worked with creative people that, are amazing from midnight to 6 a.m. Okay, let's let them do that. Let's let them, with my team, I don't worry when they come into work. I just worry that they're going to do the job. I make sure they deliver on the deadline. But when they do it, how they do it, I really don't care. So I think the pandemic has really opened that up for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Before the pandemic, a lot of people were locked into 8 to 5, 9 to 6, whatever the daily work hours were, and everybody had to fit into that mold. But since so many people have started working from home, I think we've had the freedom to see that some people are amazing early in the morning. I talked to a girl yesterday who starts writing at 4 a.m. every day. And, but by 10 or 11, she's done. So we have to be flexible with creative people, because I think, those circadian rhythms, again, they start working with us, and there's certain times a day we're amazing at, and other times a day we're just not terribly productive. So tap into that, and it can change everything.
And on the other side, flipping roles, what advice do you have for creatives when it comes to leading up to a leader who, may not understand their creative world?
Well, let me tell you, a lot of creative people will face that. I certainly did early in my career when I had I had a boss that was leading our team that just was the least creative person I'd ever met. And he didn't like creative people. He was just not open to this stuff at all. And so one of the things I learned was start making incremental changes that maybe he would not notice. I don't want to be disrespectful by any means, and don't want you to be disrespectful. But the truth is, leading from the middle is a real art form. And I learned early on in that job I had in my 20s that even though I wasn't the boss, suddenly I would start making some changes, start being intentional about things, doing things that were kind of under the radar. And before long, I noticed people started coming to me for decisions. They started coming to me for advice, and they completely ignored him when it came to real creative stuff. And so after a while, that really picks up momentum. So start where you can, influence the people below you, influence the people around you, and it will start influencing the people above you. And always be gracious. It not doesn't hurt to alienate that boss, even if he or she is a jerk. It doesn't hurt to alienate that person. Do what you can to make peace with them and work well with them. But the truth is, if you're stuck in a place where they won't let you do your thing, won't let you really exercise your creativity, it may be time to move on. If you can stay there and influence, up, as you say, that can be a positive thing. But if not, there comes a time when I think we really need to decide, am I going to stay here where I'm tolerated, or should I go someplace where I'm celebrated? That can make a huge difference in your creativity.
Yeah, such great insight. I have a few friends that are leaders that I'm sure will listen to this episode, and they run their own production companies, which I know you run your own. I'm
Yeah.
curious, what advice, specifically for them, what advice would you have to someone who just launched a production company? Maybe they're a few years in. What advice would you give them to build and scale their company and get more clients? And obviously, you've worked your way up and gotten to work with some of the world's greatest companies. I'm just curious how you did that.
Well, I'm a big believer in freelancing. I hire. We have a very small core team on here at Cooke Media Group, and we freelance most of the big jobs that we have. So I have 3 or 4 directors of photography that I work with around the country. I have 3 or 4 other writers I work with around the country, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, Every job requires different types of equipment and gear. I don't use the same camera for every job I do. It just depends on the type of shooting I'm going to be filming. Am I going to be in the desert in Ethiopia, or am I going to be in an office suite in Oslo, Norway? It all depends on what I'm going to be doing. And so I don't want to buy a bunch of stuff that I end up not using half the time. So I would rather, the other thing is, most particularly startups can't afford to hire the best people full time, but you can afford to hire amazing people if you freelance that for that project. So don't feel like you have to staff up. A big mistake I see with a lot of production company leaders is, we have to staff up. We have a big team. But let me tell you, open up your contacts, start using freelance people, and it can make a dramatic difference for you. Also, you're not carrying that financial load all the time. So that really, really helps. Another thing I would say is, be really careful who you do pick to be on your core team. Chemistry really matters. I've gotten to, we've gotten a core team so that when we're on a set filming, I hardly have to talk. I can just grunt and they know what I want.
Hmm.
You get to that level and it's really amazingly liberating. And so get that core team that the chemistry really works. There's that famous illustration of, you got to get the right people on the bus, you got to get the right people in the right seats on the bus, and then you get the wrong people off the bus. And I think one of the important things to learn early on as a leader is, learn how to let people go, learn how to fire people, because some people are just not going to make a difference for you. And I think one of the hardest things we do as leaders is fire people. And I don't believe in kicking people to the curb, but let me tell you something. If I think it was Jack Welch who, when he was CEO at GE, he said, if you're not firing, if you're keeping an underperforming employee, you're not just hurting the company, you're hurting them, because you're lying to them. You're letting them believe that they're being successful. So when you have that kind of person, get him out of there and get him plugged, or her, and plugged into a place where they can actually excel and do well. So I'm a big advocate of firing the wrong people, or I should say, firing the right people, and getting them off the bus and getting them plugged into some place in your company or somewhere else where they can really be successful. And that really makes a difference in the construction and the chemistry of your team.
Yeah. Talk to leaders about crisis management when it comes from a public relations standpoint. We live in a world where, one tweet can all of a sudden cause a major crisis for an organization.
Yeah.
What should leaders know and be prepared for, to adequately prepare for crisis?
It's not if a crisis will happen, it's when the crisis will happen. We just live in this digital social media world where word travels fast. I mean, in an instant message world, you just can't hide anymore. And one thing I would say is, we need to live transparent lives as leaders. We just can't hide. I mean, I'm amazed at the number of high profile CEOs, pastors, leaders who still get caught in adultery, who still go off the rails morally or have some kind of a problem. And they actually thought they could keep that under wraps. But you know what? You have a fender bender out on the street in your car. The minute you get out of the car, chances are somebody on the curb is making a video with their phone. You just can't hide. I actually had a pastor one time tell me, Phil, it would probably be best if you didn't tell my congregation about my yacht. And I said, well, you're an idiot. I said, number one, if they've got Google, they can download the title of the yacht. And if they've got Google Earth, they can download a satellite photo of the boat sitting at the dock. We just can't hide. So we need, as leaders, to be more transparent. And that goes in your email communication. It goes in your social media, your search history. All those kind of things are going to come up. And so we have to really think a lot about how we do that. And part of it, is be careful what you say on emails. Don't fire people through emails. Don't criticize people through emails. I have an awesome accountant. And whenever I ask my accountant a financial question, he'll always respond. I'll email him. He'll always respond with, give me a call. We'll talk about it. He knows that there are things you want to put in an email and there are things you don't. It's true with so much of policy and things that you do around your company. But a big part of all this is, things will happen, and we just have to be really sensitive to that and be responsible. Don't be so quick to pull the trigger on that social media response. I'm guilty of this as anybody. When I'll be looking through my Twitter stream and somebody will say something that really gets me worked up, and I just want to reach out and blast them. But I have to have a second thought. I have to stop, take a breath, because you're right. You can be sued over these things. You can develop an amazing amount of criticism. And we live in a world where a housewife in Toledo can pretty much take down a major corporation through momentum built up through social media. So we just have to be more careful and sensitive to those things than ever before. It's a really important part of being a leader.
Yeah. So my work, I'm a development director, do fundraising for a living, and I'm sure you've helped organizations raise millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah.
I've read about it in the book. Talk to us about what have you learned about fundraising? What do I need to know?
Well, fundraising is people struggle with it a lot, including me. Everybody's uncomfortable asking for
Sure.
money, but it's vital. And I believe, first of all, it's not about asking for money. It's about giving people an opportunity to partner with you to make this vision happen. So I think there's a way you can do it that's really successful. And one of the things that I've learned over the years, one of our clients is the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. It's just an amazing, amazing museum. And I'd encourage anybody listening or viewing, if you're in DC, go check out the Museum of the Bible. It's just really, really remarkable. And we've done all the external media for that museum from the groundbreaking. And one thing I've learned over those years was that today, short videos, I'm talking 2 to 6 minute videos, have become the number one marketing tool in America. There's more internet bandwidth, I'm told, taken up with short videos than anything other than Netflix or Amazon Prime. And so people are using short videos now to tell your organization's story for fundraising, for marketing, for awareness, for membership, all kinds of things. And so one of the things I'd encourage fundraisers to do is understand, learn the power of short videos. And the key thing about short videos is they're not about facts or statistics. If you have statistics about your organization and how amazing it is and the lives it's impacted, great. Put that in a brochure, put it on the website. But with a video, I want to see the story of a life that was transformed because of what you do. Let me
Mm.
tell you, it's emotional. Video is emotional. And if you can do that, that will really open people up to wanting to know more about your organization. So, from a fundraising perspective, really give those short videos a chance because they can tell your story in a powerful, powerful way, particularly if what you do, like with your organization, you're dealing with people on the street, with homeless people, people that are really struggling. That's so powerful visually to be able to use video to tell that story. So from a fundraising perspective, video has become really a powerful, powerful tool.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We've invested more and more in video production the past 2 years than we ever have because we definitely see that
Wow.
playing out. I want to transition into the lightning round, which is just a bunch of fun questions that I ask every leader on the podcast. And the first question is, what is the best advice you've ever received, and who gave it to you?
You know, I would not say it's advice, but it was brutal criticism. Um, when I was in my 20s, it was a long time ago, and we didn't have leadership techniques. We didn't have John Maxwell. We didn't have, everything today is about making safe spaces and, being gracious. And I'm all for, being gracious and being nice, but I grew up with working for leaders that had no clue about that. They were not afraid to throw things. They were not a thing. They were screamers. I've had profanity screamed at me over projects. I had a gun pulled on me one time in the editing room by a
Oh my
producer. I mean,
gosh!
no
Wow.
lie, this guy was a nut. And but the thing is, you have a gun pulled on you in the editing room during a project, nothing bothers you after that. Um, I think my best experience early on that I had some pretty brutal bosses, and so today, and I hated them, and we hate those guys today. But it really taught me to have a thick skin, and so
Mm,
critics don't bother me very much. People that don't like my work, that doesn't bother me very much. I also always want to improve and listen to other ideas. But I think early on, so I would just tell people listening or watching, value those harsh critics, value people that are brutally honest. Don't necessarily reject them just because they're kind of ugly to you. Stop, take a deep breath, and think about their criticism, and maybe it could apply. And I learned over and over and over again, you know what, they were jerks, but they were right, and it made a
mm.
dramatic difference for me early on. So that's a long-winded way to put it, but sometimes the harshest critics can be your best friend when it comes to improving your work.
So good. If you could put a quote on a billboard for everyone to read, what would it say?
There's a Walt Disney quote I've always loved that basically says the best way to get started is to stop talking and start doing. I meet so many creative people, producers, writers, actors who they're waiting for their big break. They're waiting to meet a producer. They're waiting for a studio deal. They're waiting to meet a publisher. They're waiting for something else, maybe a investor. Let me tell you, you become successful by starting now. I wrote 2 or 3 books before anything got published. I had 5 or 6 screenplays that I kept in my drawer that nobody had ever seen because they were the roadmap. They were really my workout to try to become a good writer. And so start right now. Your first screenplay, your first movie is not going to be the one that makes you millions and millions of dollars. It's going to be a long journey and a long road. So I think Walt was right. Get out there, stop talking about it, start doing it. Even if you have to pay for it yourself, get out there. My daughter, Kelsey, and her husband, Chris Guerra, made a movie during the pandemic and they funded it themselves. And now it's touring all over the country. It won best feature and best comedy at the Beaufort, South Carolina Film Festival. It's been in Spokane, Santa Fe. It got picked for the LA Comedy Fest. It's just picking up steam. It's got 10 or more festivals they've been invited to. And they did it on their own with their own money during the pandemic. So there really is nothing that can hold you back if you're willing to start yourself with whatever tools you have.
What's the best purchase you've made in the last year for $100 or less?
That's a great question. I don't know. I think probably an app. I use a to-do app called Things, a taskmaster called Things, and I think it's about $75 to buy it out. And at first I recoiled, but I'll tell you, it's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I'm not an advocate of getting stuck in your to-do list, but I do have to get it out of my brain and get it down on a piece of paper or in an app. If I can do that, then it frees me up. I can relax. I can think. I can be creative. But just keeping, it's really, I think, what Things is for me is more of an idea vault. I just throw my ideas in there. I've got a new book idea. Great. Put it down. I tell you this, and this might be worth sharing. Years ago, I think I talk about this in the book. Years ago, I had an encounter at a Christmas party with a very successful businessman from South Africa. And I have the spiritual gift of asking what everybody else is thinking. So I said, how did you make your money? How did you get so rich? And he said, well, it's interesting you ask. He said, years ago, back in the days of flip phones, remember flip phones? He said, my wife wanted me to go shopping with her. And he said, I hated shopping, but I love my wife. So I went. He said, at the time, I just had a regular job. I was a normal guy. Went shopping with my wife. About an hour into it, I got tired. So she went into one more dress shop and I went out and sat on a bench at the mall. He said, I started watching teenagers use their phones and he said, this idea just hit me that if they could download their favorite songs and use them as ringtones, that would probably be a really successful idea. And he said he thought so much of it. He found a brochure, a piece of paper on the bench, got a pen out, wrote it down, put it in his jacket pocket. But at that same moment, his wife called him into the store to look at a dress. He said he walked in the store and completely forgot about the idea. He said 6 months later, he went to the closet, put on that same jacket, just out of habit, reached into his pocket and found that note. And he said it reminded him of that night at the mall. And so he said, okay, I got to do this. It's a good idea. So he bought a computer, bought the rights to 5 songs, made a deal with a local cell phone company. And he said 2 years later, he sold that company for $75 million. And he looked at me and he said, Phil, but here's the thing you need to know. Had I not written that idea down, I would have completely forgotten about it. So my word to people listening today is, how often are we hit with ideas out of the blue? But if we don't capture them, and a big part of my book is capturing ideas, because if you have to deliver ideas on a deadline, the title of the book, you have to learn how to capture them well, whether it's in the middle of the night, whether you're driving, whatever it is, learn to capture your ideas because they're so fragile. If you don't, they'll disappear.
Yeah, you talked about, that story emphasizes the power of questions and your willingness to ask questions. And I always love, you've gotten to spend time with some of the most influential people on the planet. I'm curious, when you get time with a leader like that or with anyone, do you have a go-to question or two that you always ask?
You know what? That's a great thing. First of all, let me say that you're exactly right. When I'm with somebody like Mark Burnett or somebody, really significant in their career who's done really well, I don't talk about me. I want to know about them.
Yeah.
And so I'm constantly hitting them up. And yet I'll get young filmmakers who will come to my office because I travel so much. Sometimes it takes months to schedule a meeting, but I'll get young filmmakers that come to my office, want advice about their career. From the moment they walk in the door, they talk nonstop. I literally had a guy about 6 months ago that came in, sat down, started talking. I don't think he took a breath. And 55 minutes later, I finally waved my hands and said, "Excuse me, but we had an hour book. We had an hour booked. I've got to go to another meeting, and I have no idea what you
Wow.
came here for. You could have stayed at home and talked." Um, so I was kind of harsh, but I wanted him to understand that you get that moment with a great leader or somebody that's important or anybody you respect. Don't talk about you the whole time. Ask about them. So I really want to ask, how they broke through. What are they doing now? What advice would they give people? I'm just constantly barraging them with questions. And the truth is, people love to share. People love to share. And I found out no matter how big the leader is, if you're honest and you're just asking really, really good questions, they'll talk all day.
Yeah, I'm curious. You mentioned Mark Burnett. I know you've been around Joyce and Joel and so many other leaders. Have any of them impacted your life in a significant way? That's a fun story to share.
Oh yeah, a lot of different ways. A great and not always fun, but Joyce Meyer, for instance, is she one thing I learned from Joyce is she hates strife with her team, and she will
Wow.
do anything, and I mean anything to get rid of strife. She understands just how destructive it can be. So many leaders allow people on their team to nitpick each other, criticize each other, talk about each other behind their back. She absolutely will not stand for it. And as a result, her creative team is absolutely amazing. I mean, like
Wow.
her, hate her, whatever you feel about Joyce, her team rocks. And it's because she's so diligent and ferocious about rooting out strife on her team. And I think that's such an incredible, incredible thing. Other people I've learned tons of stuff from. I um, I've let me think real quick. Joel Osteen has taught me stuff. Steve Furtick has taught me stuff. Jack Graham has taught me stuff. I'm just I soak up things when I'm around people. I want to learn from them, and I think it's just I think the thing I learned from Joel. You mentioned Joel, so I'll say that I think the thing I've learned from Joel is he has trouble saying no, but he has varying degrees of yes. And once you get to know Joel, you learn what yes means yes and what yes means there is no way we're going to do that project. And he's just so incredibly gracious. And I think that's what I love about him, that non-believers, people that aren't even remotely interested in being a Christian, want to engage with him and they want to talk to him. And a lot of people he's led to Christ because he's just been so incredibly gracious with them and not been offensive and driven them away. And so we all have our different approaches and different styles, but I've learned that you can, just by being gracious, you can have such an impact on people who are hurting, broken. It's made a real difference.
Yeah, you mentioned one of the questions that you ask is, about a time they had a breakthrough in their life. And, I look at your career and even some of the people you just mentioned that you got to work with, I'm sure,
Yeah.
any producer listening to this would say, I would kill for an opportunity to work with them. Was there a breakthrough for you in your career that kind of opened those doors, or was it slow and steady?
Yeah, I'm really big on rethinking your life about every 5 to 10 years. One of the things I discovered is, I like to. I'm constantly trying to improve. I just believe that constant improvement is critical. But we have minor. We rethink our lives in minor ways, make minor adjustments. Every year or two. But every 5 to 10 years, we need to be thinking of having a huge reset. I know in my life, about 15 years ago, I looked around and I realized that. My work was getting kind of dated. My commercials, my television programs, the short films I was doing, the creative projects I was doing just were kind of dated in their style. And I looked around and I thought younger producers and camera operators and directors, they're doing some amazing things and their stuff looks a lot better than mine. And so I immediately started surrounding myself with younger people, younger vision, people that were really exceptionally sharp and creative because I want to constantly keep growing. And in the process, I learned that very often, I had gotten acclaim a number of years earlier. I'd gotten acclaim for a lot of the commercials I'd done, a lot of television programs. We'd won a bunch of awards. And I learned that when you get noticed, when you get a lot of publicity or you win awards, you kind of get stuck in that mode of thinking. When you
Hmm.
do something really well, you kind of tend to get stuck in a rut in that way. And so years go by, and if you haven't changed and adjusted and adapted to the way culture has changed, you're going to get left behind. And so it taught me a really valuable lesson, which I would share is every 10 or 15 years, have a serious rethink about the work you're doing, the style that you're doing, your leadership techniques, how you're doing that, because the world changes. And if we don't change with it, we're going to get pretty much left in the dust.
Wow. What's your greatest leadership pet peeve?
I say it again.
Your greatest leadership pet peeve.
Oh, pet peeve. Oh man, how much time do we have? I've got a lot of them. I've got a lot of them. I think one of my big pet peeves is leaders that really don't value their team. And it sounds
Mm.
strange because your team is what makes you work. But so many leaders disrespect their team, they disregard their team, they don't value their team. I have creative people call me all the time that say my boss won't spend time with me, my pastor, my CEO, they won't spend time with me. They don't want to hear my ideas about things. And it's just really tragic because John Maxwell has a great saying, and that's you got to walk the factory floor. A great leader's got to walk the floor, meet the people, know who they are. One of the things that Ed Catmull, who was the president of Pixar, they've been so wildly successful. One of the things that Ed Catmull did that I always admire so much is when they would make a movie like Toy Story and it would just be a super success, many of the animators on the film would get a bonus. And that could be 60 animators would be getting that bonus. And it would have been so easy for Ed just to direct deposit that bonus into their bank account. But he wrote out a check for everybody, and he would have them come to his office or he would go to their office and he would personally hand them that check, tell them how much they were appreciated, how much they
Wow.
meant to him, and what a contribution they made on the project. And he would do that with as many as 60 people after a successful movie. And that just made me realize why Pixar has such an incredible team around them. They're just incredible. And so that's how to build the team. Value your people, take the time with them, and it makes such a huge, huge difference.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you have a bucket list, but I know you've had plenty of cool experiences in your life. What's something that you've done that you believe everyone should do before they die?
Well, I'm a big traveler. Like I said, I filmed in about 7 countries around the world, and I was traveling overseas during the pandemic. I've learned all the pandemic rules for traveling in countries like Turkey and Italy, which is a pain. But I'm a big believer in travel. I just think my life has been so opened up because I've had these experiences, and because I'm doing documentary films very often for nonprofits or ministry organizations. You're put in very, very dangerous places. I've been caught up in a couple military coups. I've been shot at. I fell out of a helicopter flying over Jamaica. So you have that will change your life when you've had experiences like that. And it gives you a new perspective. And so it's much like having the pistol drawn on me in the edit room.
Yeah, I was
Once
just
that
gonna say.
happens, criticism
Yeah.
doesn't bother you. You go to a whole new level in your leadership. So I'd say, yeah, get out there and really do different things. I think the greatest thing about travel, particularly when you're filming on the road, is you're constantly encountering things you didn't expect. Customs officials that are jerks, or just things didn't show up on time, or whatever. There's so many issues, travel problems, that it just makes you incredibly resilient as a leader. And you're constantly coming up with, okay, plan B. What's plan B? What's plan C? What's plan D? It makes such a huge, huge difference.
Is there one item at least left on your bucket list that you could share?
Oh yeah. You know what? I've really gotten into documentary films recently, and I've got a couple documentaries on the drawing board. I can't talk about them too much, but I think what we're finding is during most of my career, documentaries were poison. I mean, nobody wanted to watch them, nobody wanted to fund them, and now with Amazon Prime and Netflix, they're becoming insanely popular. People are
Yeah.
loving really in-depth, hard-hitting documentary films. We did one right before the pandemic on the rise of Christianity in Asia, and we filmed in India, China, Mongolia, Japan, and Korea. On one single plane flight, we went from 107 degrees in India on the plane, got off the plane in minus 16 in Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia.
Hmm.
And that'll straighten you out. But documentaries are a real passion of mine. And I have a couple on the drawing board that I'm about to reveal pretty soon that I really want to pursue this year that I think will be amazing. So, and that's a good word of encouragement out there. Most Christians, I think, particularly, or people with a cause of some kind they want to promote, try to take a limited budget and do a dramatic film terribly when with that same budget, they could do a really powerful documentary film. So documentaries on the rise, and I'd encourage people to explore that more.
Yeah. If you could go back and have coffee with yourself at any age and give that Phil advice, what age would it be and what would you tell him?
Maybe every year of my life. I, you know, it drives me nuts when people say I have no regrets, because I have about a million regrets.
Hmm.
I have, I think if you look back on your life really objectively, you don't know what God has planned. You don't know the decisions you made were good, bad, or whatever. And I always think, God will compensate for bad decisions that we make. But there are things, if I knew then what I know now about the industry, about personal discipline, about my family, about things like that, I would have done things dramatically differently. There's just too many. I mentioned earlier about the fact that I launched my career as a director, and I virtually wasted 10 or 15 years.
Wow.
When had I figured out writing and producing was the thing I should focus on, where would my career be now if I could get those 10 or 15 years back? And so there's decisions like that I think maybe I learned something in that process of banging my head against a wall. But if I knew that then, I would have loved it. But probably high school, probably college, probably in my 20s, my 30s, every decade of my life, I would have loved to have had that conversation, because it would have changed. I don't know again where God would have taken me, but I think it might have changed a lot of things in my life.
And on the other side of your life, at the end of your journey, what do you want to be remembered for? What do you want Phil Cooke's legacy to be?
I think I want to be said that I was the guy that helped the church really speak the language of the culture. I think we
Mm.
live in a world today, like I said, 10,000 media messages a day. We're being overwhelmed with media. And what worked 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, is not necessarily working today. I think that what my vision in life, because I'm a Christian, and other leaders may not be, that are listening to this, but that's my passion, is how do I help the church tell their story more effectively in this incredibly cluttered culture that we live in. Pastors aren't trained in this. Seminary does not train pastors in how to, deal with media and culture and communications. They don't understand this. They're great at preaching or teaching or running a church. But when it comes to how we deal in this cluttered, distracted culture, they're pretty much lost. And so I think, if anything, the legacy I want to leave is to, maybe Phil help the church really speak the language of the culture and stay relevant when we could have easily, we're heading toward being marginalized, disappearing from the culture. I hope we can stay in the game and keep that voice out there.
Anything else you want to leave leaders with today?
You know what? I would just say, hang in there. We can always improve. We can always get better. I think one of the things I love about reading so much is that I'm constantly seeing things, and at this point in my life, that I think, why did it take me so long to learn this? There's always something new. I love the quote from Michelangelo at the peak of his career, possibly the greatest artist in the history of the world. At the peak of his career, he said, "I'm still learning." If I could say anything to you guys out there, keep learning, because the world is changing quicker than it's ever changed before. And if we're not learning, we're dying. And so keep growing, keep learning. I think that's the difference for the future.
Well, Phil, this conversation was incredible. Thank you so much for adding value to me and all the leaders that are listening to this. And thank you for everything you do for the church. It makes a huge difference.
Thank you. Thrilled to do it.